All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream training. We'll go ahead and get started here. Today, we're going to talk about filtration tips on your Evolution Elite and your McDonald's LOV fryers. My name is Randall Eby, technical trainer here at Henny Penny Corporation. And today we have a special guest for you, and that's going to be Ryan P-Rat from our contact center. He runs a team of the representatives that you would talk to when you call into the tech support line when you're needing help for your fryer. So we're going to have him talk about some of those things that you would call in for help and how that can help us in regards to filtration tips. So Ryan, what are the biggest things that come into the call center in terms of calls when people are calling in? What would be the biggest category there?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things is filtration and filtration-related issues on their piece of Henny Penny equipment.
Okay, so when it comes to those filtration issues, what do you think is probably the number one filtration item specifically in terms of what do they have struggles with out in the field that they generally need help with when they call in?
Sure. Yeah, so one of the main things is, hey, my oil's not returning to my fry pot. And what do I need to do to get that oil back up? And so what our team is trained to do is they talk about, hey, what is your motor running? Yes, it is. No, it's not. Okay, so a couple scenarios there. So if it is running, okay, we're just getting a little bit coming in or nothing at all. If it's not running, how long ago did this happen? Well, it happened maybe just a couple of minutes ago. Okay, well, there is a thermal overload that trips out possibly when that motor gets too hot. And so typically what we'll have them do is, hey, let's give that 15, 20 minutes, let that cool down, make sure that we can reset that thermal overload. That thermal overload is going to be located opposite of your pump head on your motor. On a gas unit, that pump and motor assembly is going to be right in front, right behind your left-hand door. It's going to be located right above your filter pan. That red reset button, again, is going to be opposite your pump head. It's going to be right here on the back side, and it's about the size of a dime, just kind of for a quick reference. That's usually what I like to say is, hey, that red button is about the size of a dime. On an electric unit, that's going to be in the back. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. So right up here is the red reset button that Ryan was talking about, and that would be on the back side of our motor. So as Ryan was demonstrating down there, it would be on the right-hand side. And you were starting to say for electric Evolution Elite models that I believe is going to be on the back. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. And some of your LOV earlier models as well. It's going to be in the back of the unit, so you may have to roll the unit out to get to that. This thermal overload switch, it does push kind of hard, so you may have to give it a nice firm press. At times, you may even have to use like the end of the screwdriver, the handle end, to give that a nice firm press. You should feel it click, and then we would be able to go back into that filtration menu to try and start that process.
So what about when it comes to the pan assembly? Is there any kind of items that we could run into there in terms of troubleshooting?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things, and we'll talk about that here. I got a filter pan assembly here with us. So let's walk through a few scenarios here. So one of the first things is, hey, my motor is running, but maybe it's not filling, okay? Starting to slowly come into the fry pot, but just not really filling. Usually what we have you check first is going to be our O-rings. These O-rings on the drain pan need to be replaced every 90 days. A good practice is kind of looking at that daily, or even when you do like a maintenance filter at the end of the night, or maybe when you change your oil every 7 days. Give those a good check, make sure they're there, make sure they're in good shape and not like flat spotted or anything like that to make sure that everything is good there. What happens is if those are missing or flat spotted, then we're going to get an air leak, and basically we're just going to pump air instead of oil back into the fry pot. Another scenario that we kind of run into is actually the filter pan assembly and how it is actually assembled. There is some confusion at times of maybe we have a new employee or someone that's never done it before, and so maybe they don't know how the filter pan assembly goes together per se. So let's kind of walk through that here just a moment. We have our lid. We have a latch on here. Another thing to kind of think about as we walk through this, and we'll talk about it, making sure that filter pan assembly is all the way in. So all these O-rings are on the inlet side, so we make sure we have good suction there as well. Good indicator there is making sure this latch is latched in the fryer, so we can't be able to pull it out without unhinging this latch here. Next, we have our crumb basket. Big thing there is maybe dumping this out once to twice a day. A lot of debris get built up in here as we have heavy volumes and we're doing several filtrations throughout the day. So never hurts to kind of dump this out. Obviously, the oil has to pass through this, so that does kind of slow our filtration process down at times. Next, we have our weight that lays on top of the filter pan or the filter paper itself. And then we have our filter. So our filter has two sides to it. Typically, it's going to have more of a, what I would call a rough side. And then we're going to have a smooth side. So this smooth side always goes down, and then rough side always goes up. Some of them actually have it imprinted on the filter itself. It says this side up. So we always want to make sure that that goes up in our filter pan assembly.
So Ryan, would it be a situation for no filling if that filter pad was heavily soiled as well?
It would be, yeah. So like, typically you change that filter pad once a day, usually in the morning after doing that maintenance filter. If you're a higher volume store, would definitely recommend doing that maybe even twice a day, maybe after lunch rush or after our dinner rush to get you through the end of the evening, just depending on your volume. Lastly is we have our filter screen here in the bottom, and you can see it's kind of got like a tray around the edges with it. That actually needs to lay down in the bottom of the filter pan assembly itself. You can see this is our hole here that allows the oil to pass through and back up to our filtration system and into the fry pot. Big thing that happens here maybe, okay, is this gets laid in here, maybe at an angle or it's offset. Well, what happens is we get debris or even air sucking down through there, and that's going to cause it to either slow fill or not fill at all possibly. So big thing is making sure and getting this right in the bottom of that tray there and making sure that is the bottom. We never want to put our filter pad in first. So I've seen this scenario where our filter pad here has been placed in first, and then they so happen to put this on top. What's going to happen, our filter pad here is going to get sucked to the bottom of our filter pan and then not allow anything to pass through. And then we're still going to allow some debris and stuff to get in there because this is going to be raised up off of our filter pad, and we're going to cause more issues than we need. So what we'll do is go ahead and put everything kind of back together. Big thing too, and I've seen this before, is hey, we've cleaned our filter pad at the end, or I'm sorry, cleaned our filter pan at the end of the evening, and we went ahead and reassembled everything, but it's still not pumping right. What happens sometimes if we don't dry that filter pan out, this pad here can get saturated with water. As it gets saturated with water, it gets really heavy, just as it's getting soiled with oil, and then that makes it a struggle to pump through as well. So just kind of make sure we're gonna clean our filter pan up, dry it out real good before we go to reassemble. So again, make sure we get that screen right in the bottom there, and then we can put our filter pad back in, again, rough side up, and then we'll put our weight in on top of that. It's got a couple nice handles to be able to hold that down, and then crumb screen, and then again our lid, again making sure that latch for our lid goes to the front or towards the inlet side here for the connection. That's our filter pan assembly.
So Ryan, it's probably safe to say that the no fill situation is probably pretty common. And we talked about, having to wait roughly 15 to 30 minutes for that motor to cool down before we try and go and reset it.
Yep.
So that's a great tip that could help us potentially avoid a costly service call.
Yep.
But what about a situation, Ryan, where maybe the filter pump motor is running, but the fry pot's just filling back up slowly? I'm sure we've ran across that several times in the field where it's just filling up slowly. So what are some things that we could look at there?
Yeah, so again, back to our O-rings and back to our filter pan, if we're really filling up slowly, another thing to be cautious about is as it's filling up slowly, one thing that happens at times is maybe our employees helping on the pack line or doing something different, and this is filling back up. And after a certain amount of time, it's going to time out and say, is pot full? We take a look around, oil's covering our heat tubes or covering our element on an electric unit, and pot's full. Okay, so they go ahead and hit pot is full. Well, that unit doesn't know until it begins to heat that it's not. Eventually what can happen is we could trip out our high limit and cause some more damage and then downtime as well.
So that slow filling could end up resulting in an error code is what you're saying, simply because the oil level inside the fry pot is not up where it should be.
Yep. Yep.
So with that being said, something that could probably lead to that would maybe be the dirty filter pad, maybe heavily soiled.
Yes.
And then as you had mentioned, those O-rings. So it's pretty important, if I remember correctly, that all 3 of those O-rings are supposed to be there, and we want to make sure that they're not cut or ripped.
Yep.
And I think Ryan had mentioned that it's recommended to replace those every 90 days. So that's something to remember. And something I like to throw out there as well is it's a good habit to get into to just check those O-rings on a daily basis. Maybe when you're doing your daily maintenance filter, it's a good time to look at those and just check and make sure that all 3 of them are there and that they're in good condition. Those come in packs of 10 when you order them, so you'll have several on hand for future reference. So Ryan, when it comes to filtration, is there anything else? Is there any decals or anything like that that would help us in terms of, you talked about the pan assembly?
Yep. So one thing, we just went through the pan assembly, and let's say you have a newer employee, or again, someone else that's, maybe maintaining the fryer that day. One great thing is on the inside of that same door that we opened up to look at our filter pump motor, there is a decal here. And on that decal, we're able to see the filter pan and how it's assembled. So let's say we forget or someone doesn't know, they can always reference right here to be able to look at that and be able to know how it's perfectly assembled.
And then we can also even take our phone and scan the QR code that we have right here. And that will take you to our knowledge base website, which will give you some additional information as well. So be sure to check that out. Okay. So Ryan, is there any other filtration items that come into play when people are calling into the hotline needing help? Anything else you can think of that's a hot topic that could be helpful in today's training?
Sure. So one of the key things that we have, or one of the calls that we get coming in a lot is, hey, my vat's not holding oil. And usually what happens there is our drain valve is not closing all the way for various reasons. And so if we're not holding oil, constantly leaking down oil, a couple scenarios can happen there. One, if we're leaking down oil slowly, our jib or our bib is constantly topping off our vat. Well, what happens over time is, as we go to do a filtration, one, we either overfill our next vat or we have a mess on the floor. And sometimes that's a call we get is, hey, I've got oil all over my floor. How did that happen? Well, we've got a leaking drain valve. When you're like, well, what does that have to do with filtration? Well, when we get to that leaking drain valve, a couple scenarios have probably happened. One thing, so let's say we go through an auto filtration. Hey, we look, need to filter, or it's prompting us to filter. We go through that auto filtration. Well, I go through the auto filtration, I hear the drain open, but nothing's happening. My oil is still in my vat. Well, usually what will happen is we've got a crumb impact or something blocking our drain hole from allowing it to not drain. So what we can do is we can actually take our brush, go down to the drain, go down and up out of the drain, clean that out. Well, what happens, again, let's say we're doing a couple of different things. We're working with the fryer, we're helping on the pack line. Let's say we go ahead and, oh, yep, I got the drain clear. Oh, I got to do something else over here. We're working on that. Well, this drain only stays open for about 15 to 20 seconds. So as you're doing an auto filtration, oil drains, it will wash, and then it will begin to fill back up. And that's a very quick process from start to finish. What happens is that drain doesn't know that it's impacted or has something, a brush cleaning it. So it's going to go ahead and close. Well, then it closes on that brush and we damage that valve. So
the brush could end up getting caught in the valve simply because we left it in there too long.
Exactly.
Because like you said, that drain actuator only stays open so long before it closes for the auto filtration.
Yep.
So what is something that that would be helpful for the viewer to help prevent that situation from even happening?
Sure. So when you're going through that auto filtration process, what I like to tell folks is, as you start that process and you notice, hey, it's not draining, a big thing with that brush, just a quick down and up, right? Down and up, okay, it's draining, set that aside. Never want to leave it in the fryer or in the drain valve, obviously, because then that's when the situations can happen that, affect that drain valve. So just a quick down and up, hey, it's draining, we're good, take that out of play.
So also I think if I remember correctly, it prompts us to skim the vat.
Yeah.
Why is that important?
Yeah, so big thing is crumb debris getting across that drain and clogging that drain, right? So if we ever notice in a vat, and let's say we've been cooking all day up through getting to our lunch period, we've got a lot of debris hanging out on top. Big thing is we want to take this skimmer here and get those heavy debris off so it doesn't clog that drain, so we don't get to that situation of having to unclog it essentially.
So what about if throughout the day, my as the day proceeds,
Mm-hmm.
what if my fryer's just constantly asking me to filter and I'm hitting no and going on throughout the day?
So
Is that going to have an impact on maybe this drain brush stuck in the valve situation? Or
yeah, for sure. So if let's say we're busy, right? We're going through our day, and to Randall's point, it's kind of constantly prompting us. Well, after so many cook cycles, it's going to ask you, hey, to filter now. If you skip that, you keep moving on, it's going to ask you, it's going to cut that in half. So let's say we go 12 cook cycles, cuts us in half down to 6. We skip it again down to 3, and eventually it's going to prompt us after every single cook cycle. Well, what happens is all those debris from not filtering are collecting in the bottom of the fry pot over time, and then that's what's clogging our drain and causing us some issues there. So very, very critical to filter when
so
prompted.
that's really what's leading up
Yes.
to the potential of getting that drain brush caught in the valve, is because possibly we've skipped too many filters, and all that crumb buildup, like Ryan's saying, is just continuing to collect inside that fry pot. It's sitting down there in the bottom where the drain valve is. Additionally, like Ryan had mentioned, it's crucial that we want to skim that vat every time to get that larger buildup off the top layer of that oil, so that, again, it doesn't go down to the bottom as well and continue to clog up that drain valve. Those are great, helpful tips. So what is something that someone could do proactively throughout the day? Like, let's say they're coming up to their lunch rush. Is there anything that they could do in terms of, those crumb buildups building down there, and maybe not getting it to even prompt us throughout our lunch rush? Is there anything that they could do?
Yeah, so something I definitely recommend, my team recommends as you're going through your day is, let's say you have 12 drops before you get to your filter cycle. What we recommend is, let's say it's 11 o'clock. We know we get busy, start getting ready to go into our lunch rush. Let's be a little bit more proactive rather than reactive. So what we can do is we can just walk by the unit, take a look, and all we have to do is touch one of our filter buttons here. Okay, touch our filter button. We can see we have 10 cooks left. Okay, we also have not only global, but we have mixed, where you can see a percentage as well. So let's say we're getting down, to 1 or 2 cook cycles, or we're getting up above 100% of that. Big thing is again, be proactive rather than reactive. If we're down to like 2 cook cycles, okay, and we know it's 11 o'clock, and that thing's going to beep it right at 11:30 or 12 o'clock, right in the middle of my lunch rush, and I'm going to have to skip it. Why not be a little proactive? It takes less than 5 minutes. Go ahead and do that auto filtration. Get that process done. Hey, it's 11:05. I've got 12 cook cycles to get through my lunch rush. Helps to prevent that.
So what you're saying, as far as if a person does see that, they're getting close to that 0 mark on the screen, let's say it's about the 11:30 hour, they're getting ready to go into their lunch rush. What they could do is just walk by and hit that F button real quick and check either that percentage or the amount of cook drops that are left. It's going to tell them real quick. And then what they can do is, after they see that, they see where they're at. If they're close to that percentage or that cook drops, they can be proactive and actually go in by pressing and holding the F button. It'll actually take us into our filter menu. And then all they would have to do is go ahead and confirm this express filter. And what that's going to do after they go through that automatic express filter, it's going to reset that count that we just seen back to either a 0 or its full cook drop capacity. So that's a great helpful tip for you in the field, to where if you're trying to get through your lunch rush without the filtration bothering you and coming up to filter now, that's a great proactive tip to be able to just walk by, hit that F button, and see where it's at. And then if it is getting close to that mark, then we can go ahead and be proactive, do an express filtration by going into the filter menu, and then it's going to go ahead and reset that for us. And then hopefully at that situation, especially if we've reset all 2, 3, or 4 of our vats, then we should be able to possibly go through the whole lunch rush without it asking us to filter now. Something I like to recommend for that situation also is to make sure you're staggering your loads. That's also going to help when it comes to the possibility of the fryer asking you to filter now. And what I mean by that is, let's say vat number 1 here is right next to your fry dump station. And because of its location, this is the one we use since it's closest to the fry dump station. And maybe vat 2 and 3 over here during our not busy times aren't getting used as much. What I like to recommend is to stagger that, to make sure that if we have the available products on our screen, make sure that we're not always dropping it in the same vat if possible. Stagger that between the other loads so that way this one doesn't ask you to filter all the time. So what about filter stats. Is there anything that we can do there to be able to check anything?
Yep.
I mean, the biggest thing we talked about there is our goal should be 0 skips. So we don't want to skip going throughout the day, because we know that can lead to other problems like Ryan had mentioned, with maybe the filter pan getting excessively clogged up with crumbs, or maybe our drain valve getting clogged up and causing us a stuck drain brush in the valve. And then that ends up leading to a service call that we definitely want to avoid. Yeah. So what about filter stats? Is there anything that we can do there?
So there is. So, I mean, you can keep the computer keeps a 7-day record of your filter stats and what your team is doing throughout the day. It just keeps that daily stat for you. So you actually can go in and look at those, kind of know how many times they've filtered and how many times they've actually skipped. You know, we understand that a few skips are going to be common, just because in a busy time, you know, it's hard to drop a load and wait 5 minutes. It seems like forever, right? So one thing we can do is we can actually go in and kind of monitor that and make sure that we're doing the best that we can. If we come back to our control here, we can actually hold our outside 2 buttons, so our I and our P button, okay? Hold those at the exact same time. It's going to take us into our info mode. Into our info mode, then we can step through using the P button here, and we can actually go to daily stats. Daily stats is where it's going to show us some different things of on hours, filters, bypasses, things like that. We can use our down arrow that's lit up here, and tells us April 19th, Tuesday. Okay, it's the on hours. We click it one more time. Here it shows us our filters. Okay, and you can see it says Tuesday and it shows 0. What I can do is I have my number 1 button flashing here. I can actually go through and look at 7 days worth of data, and it's all broken down by different days. And that's on our filter side. If I hit my down button one more time, that's where we see the skips. And again, it just keeps every day record. It doesn't necessarily by hour, but it's day by day. And we can look in there. And so let's say our filter counts at 100 and our skips are at 50. Well, that's not necessarily a good ratio, right? We want our filters to be at 100 and our skips to be at 5. Okay. Again, understand some may happen, but we need to keep those to a minimum to kind of help prevent some of the issues we've talked about. And again, you can step through day by day. Okay. To get out of that menu, again, the I and the P button, same time, gets us back to our home screen.
So a good helpful tip there would maybe to be assign someone weekly in your store to go through and check some of those settings to see how many skips are taking place versus how many filters, especially if we're seeing some drain brushes caught in the drain valve, or maybe some filtration issues that Ryan had spoke about. We can go through there and just check that maybe weekly if we assign it to someone, to see how that looks, and then we can use that as a tool to prevent some of those issues that we talked about. Let's do a quick little recap here. And so we talked about a few different things today. Ryan mentioned the no filling situation with the filter pump motor, and then how we can reset that to potentially avoid a service call. The key thing that we want to remember there is to give it adequate time to cool down, roughly 15 to 30 minutes, so that it will allow that thermal overload to cool down before we go and try and reset it. Also, we talked about the slow filling situation. Ryan had mentioned the O-rings and then also the pan assembly. Remember, those O-rings are supposed to be replaced every 90 days. We can order those. Those come in packs of 10, so we can have plenty of them on hand. A good tip there is to check those daily when we're doing our daily maintenance filter. Make sure all 3 of them are present, and make sure that there's no cut or rips or tears in those O-rings. And the last thing we talked about was the potential of getting a drain brush caught in the drain valve. And we talked about a few tips there that we can do to help prevent that, in terms of making sure that we're skimming the vat every time before we do an express filtration. We also talked about not skipping filters, and what that does is that helps prevent the crumb buildup from getting down into the bottom of the fry pot and clogging up that drain. Because as Ryan had mentioned, that drain valve only opens for roughly 15 to 30 seconds, and then it'll close automatically. So if we accidentally leave that drain brush in there, it's going to close on that, and then it's going to cause us problems, which will eventually end up leading to a service call. So remember, if in the event that you do have to get that drain brush out and use it, make sure that we quickly put it down in there and bring it right back out, so that we don't give it the chance to get stuck. So those were some of the tips that we talked about. We also talked about being proactive in terms of when it comes up to our lunchtime, we can go through here and hit our F button. That's going to tell us how many cooks remaining we have, or how far we are in that percentage, depending on how your fryer is programmed. And we also talked about going in and being able to check our filter stats when it comes to looking and seeing how many times we've skipped. A tip there that we had mentioned was maybe assigning that to someone in the store weekly to go through there and check that. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Be sure to join us next time on August the 11th. We're going to be talking about forehead, best filtration, and pressure-related issues and how to avoid service calls. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.